Japan has a new problem. Harassment of people and physical assaults are increasing day by day. For a while, it seemed like kasuhara, better known as customer harassment, where people abuse retail workers due to their inability to fight back, was the biggest problem. But things got even worse once chikan, men who sexually harass young girls, became a problem so big that even separating men and women during the rush hour wasn't enough to stop it. And just when it seemed like things couldn't get any worse, a third form of harassment has now emerged in Japan. Japan is often seen as one of the safest and most polite countries in the world. And while that has historically been true, recently something has happened that has changed everything. This didn't happen overnight, since for a long time Japan has been boiling underneath. Decades of social pressure, overwork, and emotional repression have created a large group of people who feel invisible in Japanese society and powerless to control their lives, which eventually leads them to take out their anger on innocent people around them. These are called Butsukari. Butsukari are people who physically assault random bypassers during rush hour when there are many people around and they can quickly vanish into the crowd. These random attacks usually happen inside train stations during the mornings when the crowds are massive and people are in hurry. Times like these are an opportunity for a Butsukari to attack someone in the crowd and quickly escape from the crime scene before the victim or anyone else has time to react. The most common way for Butsukari to assault people is to slam onto them with their shoulder as hard as they can in the crowd. This is even where their name comes from, since Butsukari in English basically means a slammer. However, the term Butsukari is essentially an umbrella term for all the people who physically assault random bypassers in the crowd. These can include kicking someone or something, pushing people around, and any other form of physical contact. Some Butsukari even go as far as causing permanent damage to their victims, like in the case that happened in Tamachi Station recently. A man who was on his way to work was approached by a stranger walking on the wrong side of the road. This stranger then forcefully slammed onto the man and continued walking. But then, after the victim had turned his back to the situation, he could hear the man running towards him from behind, and as he turned his head to look, he was sucker punched to the head by the stranger who slammed onto him. The stranger then grabbed the man by the collar and started kicking him to the head with his knee while shouting, "Don't underestimate us local people." After the altercation, the victim was then rushed to the hospital, where he had to spend 2 weeks due to his injuries. These kind of incidents aren't just random acts of violence, since Butsukari are a well-known epidemic in Japan and it's only getting worse day by day. According to a survey, 14% of people in Japan have been victims of a Butsukari. However, some online surveys show even higher numbers. Most of these cases happen in large cities, and there's a clear correlation between the population and the cases. The bigger the city, the more Butsukari there are. One of the most common excuses by Butsukari is that they're fighting against so-called arukismaho, people who walk while looking at their smartphones. When confronted, many of them claim they're just teaching a lesson to the people glued to their phones, but in reality, it's just an excuse to justify random aggression. The interesting and unsurprising thing in all of this is that there seems to be a higher chance of getting assaulted the smaller in stature you are, which is why most of the victims are young women. According to most of the surveys, women are the main victims of Butsukari, as can even be seen in all of these videos that I found online. There also seems to be a higher chance of getting assaulted the younger you are, and many times the attacks can be just as vicious even if you're young. As for example, in another recent case, a young woman was stopped at the station by a man telling her she was getting in his way. When the man got the woman's attention, he then punched her in the chest, which caused her to break her ribcage. Most of the Butsukari seem to be older men, and since they tend to attack women and smaller people, to me it seems like these are troubled people with anger issues who then take their anger out to people in the most pussy way possible. By secretly slamming onto people much smaller than them because they're too cowardly to face their issues or their victims. The problem with trying to stop these Butsukari is that since they do it quickly and silently in a crowd while also pretending it's an accident, it's essentially almost impossible to convict them. Even though it does count as a physical assault, it's hard to prove intent to their slamming, and unless it's caught on camera or the Butsukari confesses, they pretty much always walk free. Considering how common the Butsukari are, this is one of those things I'd like to warn all of you about when you're coming to Japan. Now obviously I'm not saying it will happen to you, but just be mentally prepared in case it happens. Since I've read many stories from people online who say their trip was ruined once they were attacked. If we just search shoulder check Japan on Reddit, we will be greeted with many posts like this. Recently, I went on an 8-day trip to Tokyo, but throughout those 8 days, I've been shoulder checked 1+ times 5 out of 8 of those days. I'm not gonna say it's gonna happen to you this much, since this seems a bit excessive, but the point is, it happens. It became so frequent that my family began to also retaliate by shoulder checking back the individuals. Now, I understand the feeling, and to be honest, I would probably start doing the same myself, but at the same time, I can't really say that starting to shoulder check people back is the most noble course of action here. However, I can't help but blame myself for it, as if I deserved this for being a tourist in Japan. How can I at least mitigate getting shoulder checked next time I come back? For reference, I am a Chinese woman and didn't speak much Japanese, so I did communicate in Mandarin to my family. Yeah, this is kind of the sad state of affairs at the moment, that Japanese people aren't really too fond of Chinese tourists, or by any tourist by that matter. But don't get scared, you will have great time in Japan and 99% of people will be nothing but nice to you, but you know, there's a lot of tourism in Japan right now, tensions are high, and there will be racist anywhere you go in the world. Quick rant, my spouse and I were walking through Shinjuku station with a local friend to grab lunch. As we walked by the west exit, an older Japanese man punched me hard in the ribs next to my right breast. It was a well-aimed punch as I was wearing a small backpack, so he managed to hit just between my arm and a back as I walked by. Aw, that sucks. As you can see, even from this story, it's not like the Butsukari will always, shoulder slam you hard, because sometimes they might do other things, like in this woman's case, she said that the older Japanese man punched her really hard to her, rib cage. I was shocked. When I turned to look, he raised both his fists and shook them in my face. In retrospect, I wish I'd grabbed his hand and yelled for a guard, but I just hurried away and he disappeared into the crowd. I didn't post this to scare anyone away from Shinjuku Station or from traveling in Japan in general. I'm feeling a bit raw about it, that's all. That last part that she said is a really good thing to say, and that is also the message I want to leave all you guys with. Japan is a wonderful country with wonderful people, but just like any country, it has its problems and its crazy people. Right now, the government is trying to take countermeasures against Butsukari, for example, by separating the roads to encourage people to not walk towards each other. None of this will really help in the end though, since big cities like Tokyo are gonna have their problems and people like this will always exist. In the end, the scary part of Butsukari isn't that they exist, it's the fact that they've learned how to blend in and you'll never know when you become a target.